Home has apologised for its oversight in failing to obtain a licence. The Chancellor apologised earlier when it emerged she didn't have one for the property in South East London. Business Secretary Peter Kyle was asked about the issue by LBC earlier.
Rachel did do something that she has apologised for. She didn't drag it out like the Tory chancellors of the past, where they dragged it out for month and month after month and then they were sacked. She apologised straight away and she has moved on and she has got back to the job of serving our country.
A 70-year-old man has died after a helicopter crashed in South Yorkshire. The pilot and 2 other passengers, including a 10-year-old boy, were injured. The British government is chartering flights to bring Britons back home from Jamaica. Many commercial planes have been grounded as a result of Hurricane Melissa. And Virgin Trains is a step closer to being able to compete with Eurostar on Channel Tunnel services. A regulator has approved the company's application to share a train depot in East London. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 3 points at 97.60. The pound buys $1.31 and €1.13. LBC weather, heavy rain tonight, spreading eastwards before clearing away by dawn. The odd shower may then linger in the west, a low of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, will not be popular this winter. Lots of people in politics and outside politics want her out. This is because of the struggling economy and higher taxes and a general sense of disappointment. But what she should not be resigning for is this latest row. Reminder, she failed to get a local licence for renting her old family home. She makes £3,200 a month from it when she moved into Downing Street after the election. Her local council, Southwark in South London, says that private landlords in some areas, not all, must get a special licence. She didn't know about this and she did not apply for it. She has now. Her lettings agent has now apologised for the oversight. I don't want to minimise this issue. The government, her government, demands licences and certificates of all kinds from landlords and other small businesses, and ordinary people have to struggle to remember and comply. So first, a bit of a reality check. Also, she supported the licensing of landlords, so second, some will smell a whiff of hypocrisy. Tonight, after more emails became available to him, the Prime Minister said his ethics advisor was going to be looking at this, but those emails from and to her husband pretty much cleared her. This story is not nothing, but nor is it anything like a resigning offence. It's hardly what most of us would call criminal behaviour. Reeves made no attempt to cover anything up. There has been no wild misbehaviour, no failure to pay her taxes, which would be a resignation matter. And for the rest of us, perhaps there is a more general problem. We seem to be whipping ourselves up into a froth of perpetual fury about politicians. We apply a level of finger jabbing towards them we don't to our own friends or our families or our neighbours. They are all crooks and fools. They should be fired. They should be hounded out of office. And actually, quite a lot of the time we do get them out. And then we look around ourselves at a flailing government and scratch our tousled heads and we ask, why don't we get better politicians, the best people for the most important jobs? Well, go figure. It has been quite a day, and our political correspondent, Aggie has been observing every minute of it. Aggie, lots and lots of twists and turns. At one point, it really looked as if Rachel Reeves was in deep trouble.
It did indeed. At the afternoon opportunity to ask the Prime Minister's spokesperson questions, they said new information had come to light, and I think sort of sweaty brows all among those journalists and in the Treasury too. But Andrew, it transpired, and in the last few minutes we've got these emails. It transpired that new information, I think, has basically exonerated the Chancellor. So yesterday, when she wrote to the Prime Minister, she basically said to him, look, I didn't know about this licence, I didn't get this licence, I was never told about this licence, but she said in her new letter that she has just sent to the Prime Minister that actually her husband did know about the licence. Her husband, Nick Joycey, was told by the letting agent, and we have those emails between him and the letting agent. The letting agent actually offered a number of different times to get that selective licence that the Reeveses needed. And then this person resigned. So that person suddenly
resigned. So there was somebody
resigned.
missing inside the lettings agency at the crucial point.
Exactly. So they then suddenly resigned. And today, the letting agency called Harvey Wheeler have now apologised to Rachel Reeves. So they have said, we alert all our clients to the need for a licence in an effort to be helpful. Our previous property manager offered to apply for a licence on these clients' behalf, as shown in the correspondence. That property manager suddenly resigned on the Friday before the tenancy began on the following Monday. So I think, Andrew, that is probably just about the end of that. And the jeopardy, I think, is gone for Rachel Reeves.
The Prime Minister has now said there's nothing more to see here. There's going to be no investigation.
Indeed. I think, though, there are questions about how everything worked today. So, number 10, think that those emails basically exonerate Rachel Reeves. But everybody was whipped up into a bit of a fury. The Conservative leader, of course, Kemi Badenoch, posted on social media, this whole thing stinks. And I wonder whether she will row back on some of her criticism too. This is her speaking to our colleague Natasha Clark a little earlier.
This woman is not on top of her paperwork, and she's not able to focus on growing our economy, which is the job that she has. But Keir Starmer said that lawmakers shouldn't be lawbreakers. Those were his standards, his rules. He should apply them to his own front bench. It can't be one rule for them and then another rule for everyone else.
You've got to be very careful about what you know before you denounce people and say there's a stink. Anyway, she is on, Kemi Badenoch, with our colleague Ian Dale after this show, and I'm sure she'll be asked about exactly that. For now, Aggie, thank you very, very much indeed. Let's turn now to the Conservative peer and columnist, Lord Daniel Finkelstein. Does he think that we're falling too deep into a ridiculous culture where calls for resignations have become the default? And we spoke, I should say, just before the latest news came out.
The problem is if we call for people to resign for everything, then we don't necessarily prioritise the right things. I do think, by the way, that if Rachel Reeves ends up putting up income tax when the government had promised in the general election not to, that really is a resigning matter. Is this? Pretty much definitely not. Look, the government even knew that there were so many people who weren't aware of this particular licence that they actually included some text to say that people would have to be reminded of it. So it's not a sensible thing to start calling for everyone to resign over every administrative error that they sort of do. You know, people do get prosecuted for this if their properties are basically degraded or they've in some other way broken the terms of the licence and therefore are ignoring not merely the licence but the substance of the licence. And there's no clue that she did that. And if she'd done that, I think it would be very serious, not only externally but inside the Labour Party, where issues of landlord behaviour are a very, very sort of serious political issue. It's not good for her.
It's not good, but I mean, we shouldn't minimise it in the sense that clearly she has committed an offence for which she could be prosecuted and fined in the context of a government which is asking more and more of landlords generally. So it doesn't do her any good, but it certainly, in my view, it falls below the level of obviously she has to go. Yeah,
look, she did, not help herself by the fact that within the last sort of 10 days, she congratulated Leeds, I think, I may have got this wrong, which council it was, but on issuing, sort of instructions to have these licences. So she clearly thinks they're a good thing, and then she'd failed to do them herself. So it doesn't shed a particularly good light on her. But I suppose we all do make these mistakes. The question is whether, and I don't, by the way, I think this very important thing, I don't want Westminster to stop being more concerned about these things than the rest of the world, because lots of people don't know anything about politics, and if you start to sort of think these things are completely irrelevant, you get Donald Trump is what you get, right, where somebody can commit several offences and then win a general election after it. I don't really want that to happen, but I think you've got to have a sense of proportion that's really important.
So I think the thing that we all struggle with, Danny, is, where do you draw the line? At what point does something become a resigning issue? Is it around deceit? Is it around trying to not pay your taxes or defraud somebody else? I mean, where is the line, do you think?
Well, I mean, obviously there are sort of formal lines, which would be actual criminal behaviour for which somebody is prosecuted, and it doesn't look to me like it's very common at all to prosecute somebody in her particular circumstances. So then, and after that, you are left with a bit like the Supreme Court in the United States said when trying to distinguish between art and pornography, that you know it when you see it. It's what Angela Rayner did, of course, was to break the ministerial code by saying that she'd had advice that she did not have. And clearly you can't have people lying to the Prime Minister, for example. So, and when you make mistakes like this, you then suddenly sometimes get pulled into making further mistakes like lying to the Prime Minister. But if she has not done that, then I think this does fall below it. So, you know, should people resign for the parties in 10 Downing Street? Well, there it was a big case of hypocrisy. So the question is whether or not this falls foul of that in a very serious way, and people feel as though they've been asked to do something that she's not abiding by, or which she broke deliberately. And I you know, again, it's all a question of taste, I suppose. But I don't think it falls above that. It comes above that level, in my view.
I agree with that. But I was very interested. You said at the beginning, Danny, that if she raised income tax, she should resign for that. Now, I should say straight out that I think of all the bad options available, one of the least bad options is raising income tax for everybody. But your position would presumably be that because this was, as it were, contract between Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer and the country, that's why it should be a resigning issue.
I wrote an article in the Times during the general election where I said it was perfectly obvious that Rishi Sunak was correct in saying the Labour Party would have to put up taxes by a lot to fund its plans. And readers were furious with me for saying that. I was inundated with comments saying, you know, I was completely wrong and it was outrageous and Rishi Sunak was lying. And we fought the election on that basis, that, you know, that the whole country did. And to come back at that point and say, well, actually, we are going to have to put up taxes, despite the fact that we denied it, I think that, yeah, that is a resigning matter as far as I'm concerned. And it's entirely different to where, you know, it's entirely different to this administrative issue. And I do think the government as a whole, and particularly its Chancellor, have to consider its position. She was Shadow Chancellor. She made these promises. This is a bit like when Jim Callaghan felt he couldn't carry on after he devalued the currency, the Labour government having said that it wouldn't do that repeatedly. And that was better because it didn't say that during a general election. This was the central general election promise of the Labour Party, or one of the central general elections. It was crucial to maintaining their whole political position and underpinned it. And I think if it goes, then she should go with it.
And you think that the excuse or explanation that actually things have turned out much more badly than could have been predicted at the time wouldn't wash?
No, it's ridiculous. I mean, I think if they sort of said, which I think would be a more reasonable point, well, actually all the parties were in this position, and the Conservatives also said they'd be able to do things with tax and spend that were completely impossible because their spending proposals were wrong. That would be a fairer argument, but it would indict others. It wouldn't help them. You know, if you fight a general election with your central manifesto pledge being that you're not going to raise something you subsequently think you will have to raise, you promise no tax surprises, you do that repeatedly, you make it central to your manifesto, and you are the Shadow Chancellor responsible for that, then I think you should consider your position very seriously in these circumstances.
Very, very interesting, Danny. We will see in the next month or so whether this is a live issue for her or not. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Rob Ford is Professor of Political Science at the University of Manchester and also the co-author of The General Election of 2024, and he joins me now. Rob, great to have you on the show. Can I ask, I don't know if there's any statistics, but my impression is that we see more political resignations in recent decades than we saw in the past.
Well, your impression is, I think, right, Andrew. It may be particularly driven by the Parliament that we all just lived through from 2019 to 2024, which featured an extraordinarily high level of churn. But of course, that's not the only wave of scandal we've had in recent years. We had the expenses scandal back in 2009.
I was going to say, I thought that's really the big one, where the country sort of turned against politicians in a massive way because there were so many examples of the duck houses and the moats and the rest of it.
I mean, it certainly left a lasting mark, but I think it accelerated a downward trend that's been going on for a while. I looked up the stats on this. Back in 1997, at the start of the previous Labour government, 12% of the public said they trusted politicians to tell the truth almost never, quote unquote. That figure is now 45%, so nearly half of the electorate. And I think that illustrates why we get the kinds of stories that we've got over the last day or two.
Does it also mean, in your view, that we're not getting the best people to become politicians? Because we all know that if you're a sensitive flower or very easily upset or thin-skinned, politics is probably not the right trade for you. But we seem to have gone into a new mode where, there's an allegation and within about 30 seconds there is demands for resignations and everything stinks and all the rest of it. And you think for an awful lot of people, this must be a very serious turn-off to any kind of public service.
I think there is a risk that it produces a kind of doom loop, yes, because if you are, if you're guilty of sort of administrative oversight, which many of us with busy lives and limited organisational capacity would be potentially guilty of, in our own lives with our friends and neighbours, we probably explain the situation and they would understand us. Yeah. If we have the letters MP after our name and we do something similar, everyone has convicted us and wants us in the stocks within minutes of the story breaking. And even when the full details come out, maybe very slow to understand and forgive because of that lack of trust. And then what you get is a situation where only those with copper-bottomed iron constitutions and or little interest in behaving ethically find the idea of a political career attractive.
Well, you go exactly where I'm going. Not only do you keep out the people you want, you bring in the people you don't want. And that's partly, perhaps, I say this as a journalist, part of the media's fault as well.
Well, yes. I mean, if you have a kind of political news cycle that revolves around waves of shame and outrage against people for even the most minor of offences, then what you will do, it's a kind of process of natural selection, familiar to David Attenborough facts. You select for the most shameless individuals because those are the ones best positioned to survive that kind of thing because it simply doesn't bother them in the same way as it would the average person.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I have never heard it put quite as plainly and simply as that. Professor Ford, thank you so much for that. Now, I've done some digging and I've uncovered a bit of a problem inside the Ministry of Defence that could spell bad news for the armed forces. More on that in a few moments, but you're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr and the time now is 6:18.
Call Kemi. Put your questions to the leader of the Conservative Party tonight from 7, only on LBC.
Do you know your state pension age? No. Maybe you're not sure, or you don't know how to check. It's so quick and easy to check online. All you need is your date of birth. Knowing your state pension age helps you think about your future. So check yours today. Search state pension age on gov.uk and simply enter your date of birth. State pension age. It's good to know.
Switching to Vodafone full fibre broadband is now as easy as pie. Ooh, freshly baked. It's a walk in the park. Hello, little fella. It's like taking candy from a baby. Come on, as if I'd do that. With One Touch Switch, it's easy. We sort everything out for you. We even contact your current provider. Plus, we'll help towards leaving fees. Switch today to full fibre broadband with Vodafone.
Up to £200 credit to cover leaving fees. More information and terms at vodafone.co.uk/broadband.
If you bought a home on a holiday park in the UK, what you thought you were getting may not be what you ended up with. From unexpected site fee increases, running costs, a huge depreciation in value, many owners feel they've been missold. If you think this might be you, holidayparkadvicecentre.co.uk could help you receive the compensation you're entitled to. Text ASSIST to 78900 to find out more. That's ASSIST to 78900.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
Now, of course, the Rachel Reeves row is happening against the background of the November budget, in which we'll be asked to pay higher taxes to keep the state machine running, while asking whether it's any good at what it does. And there are lots of arguments about waste and priorities. And tonight, I have something to tell you about defence, one of the biggest challenges facing Britain today. Keir Starmer has agreed a long-term uplift in military spending, and people in the forces are keeping their fingers crossed that he honours this commitment. But meanwhile, in this financial year, there is apparently an overspend by the Ministry of Defence of somewhere between £1.5 and £2 billion. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, is not going to go back to Rachel Reeves and ask her to find him some more cash because he's got the "but there is no cash, matey" memo already. And that means the service chiefs, Army, Air Force, Navy, are going to have to find ways to save money very quickly. We're talking about training being cancelled, recruitment bans, perhaps delays in buying shells and other kit. At a time when we're trying to persuade the Russians we're really serious about rearmament, this is not great news. So let's talk now to General Lord Richard Dannatt, the former head of the British Army, now a crossbench peer. Lord Dannatt, thanks for coming on to the show. I'm told that these kind of overspends have happened in the past, but in the past, the Secretary of State for Defence goes to the Chancellor and says, can you pony up a little bit of extra emergency cash? And that normally happens. Is that right?
Well, every year is different. It is not unusual for the Ministry of Defence to struggle to make its books balance at the end of the year, and also struggle to look to make the books balance for the following year. But I think this conversation, Andrew, has to be placed within the much wider context of the fact that we are just not spending enough money on defence at the present moment. With great cries of triumph, we're raising spending in the relatively short term to 2.6% of GDP. And that's largely because 0.2% has been taken off the international development budget. But we all know that we've got to be spending much more, up to 3.5% really for starters. And then the NATO Trump-infused target is now up to 5%. And frankly, if we want to be taken seriously in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, if we want to be taken seriously in the eyes of our NATO partners, we've really got to find more money and find it really quite quickly.
Let me come on to that in just a second, because you're right, that is the crucial context. But in terms of a short-term shortfall of up to £2 billion, how difficult is it going to be for service chiefs to actually find ways of saving money?
Well, it will be difficult, and as your introduction suggested, the worrying thing is that they may have to cut what we would call activity levels. That's training and those things that soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines actually do on a daily basis. And of course, once you start cutting those levels of activity, you really are endangering morale. What people in military units like to do is to get on and live their lives, train for operations, carry out exciting and worthwhile training events. And of course, when you stop doing that and start cutting, let's say, overseas exercises, then life becomes pretty dull, pretty boring, and quite quickly becomes pointless. So that increases the outflow of trained members of staff, and you really don't want to see that. And you alluded to possibly even curtailing recruitment. Well, given that the services are undermanned at the present moment, that's the last thing we want to be doing. So it's going to be quite a nightmare for the service chiefs to know how to balance their books. Well, the imbalance has probably come as a result of overspends in the equipment area. That's usually what happens.
Well, that's a very, very useful insight. Just returning to your original point, however, about the overall level of spending. Clearly, Putin is not less of a threat than he was 6 months or a year ago. And the public is told again and again that we are rightly, absolutely shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. Do you think that the public mood, which still remains relatively hostile to much higher military spending, requires a political direction of a kind we haven't had? In other words, we need to be told even more bluntly what the threats are and the consequences would be of not spending enough on our defence.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. A few months ago, there was quite a head of steam building up along the lines that we do need to spend more on defence. This was a head of steam building up ahead of the last big NATO summit. And Donald Trump and Keir Starmer both made announcements about increasing to 3.5% and to 5%. And in a sense, that seemed to win the argument. But of course, it's gone quiet since then, because as we approach the budget on the 26th of November, there are so many competing pressures on the Treasury that it seems extraordinarily unlikely that Rachel Reeves will find any large amounts of money. But the problem hasn't gone away. In fact, I would actually argue that the problem has increased. Insofar as there is talk about a ceasefire in Ukraine, and at some point that may well happen. Well, the consequence of a ceasefire in Ukraine is that Vladimir Putin will stop losing 1,000 soldiers a day. He can start refurbishing his military equipment, and he can start thinking about where else he's going to put pressure on the NATO partnership. Will he press in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, on Poland, more incursions? He would love to test the cohesion of NATO, and he'll do it.
He certainly will. A very alarming prospect. Lord Dannett, thank you so much for talking to LBC tonight. The left-wing MP, the left-wing Your Party MP, Zarah Sultana, has made a new enemy. Olga Borisova, member of the anti-Putin Pussy Riot protest group and punk band, sentenced to 8 years in prison and now in exile from Russia in Britain, was infuriated by the MP's dismissal of Ukraine's President Zelensky as no friend of the working class. Olga joined me a little earlier and she told me what it was about Sultana's comments that she found so offensive.
Well, I think she didn't offend me, but she definitely offended Ukrainian people by speaking about this war in those Marxist-Leninist terms, whether President Zelensky represents the working class, because I think that's quite ignorant towards Ukrainians that already gave up their lives defending their homes. And for those who are right now in trenches, literally defending their right to be Ukrainians, defending their genuine desire to not live under Russian oppression. And I think it's a very stupid optics to use.
Would it be fair to say that by apparently comparing Putin and Zelensky as leaders who didn't have the working class's best interests at heart, she was in a sense making a parallel between the two sides, as if there was no real difference, as if one had not invaded the other?
Yeah, I think it's wrong to put them on the same level and present it as just, well, Putin is bad. We know Putin is bad, but Zelensky is not good either. I think they're not on the same level just because this war started in 2014, and it's just Putin doesn't want to for Ukraine to go a different way. He wants to control it, and obviously that's an imperial war against Ukraine, and it's not just some war for resources.
And when it comes to the two sides, obviously you protested very vigorously back in the day. You were sentenced to jail, I think, for that, and you've been pursued by the Russian authorities ever since. Do you see any sign of dissent returning inside Russia in a big way, given how many people have died? We've seen reports of people singing anti-Putin songs in the streets, but it's very hard from outside Russia to know quite what's going on.
Yeah, well, basically, since 2022, new laws been introduced, such as the law against fakes about Russian army, which I've got just like over a month ago, 8 years in prison for the anti-war song, because basically any information you share that is not confirmed by the Ministry of Defense, Russian Ministry of Defense, considered fake. So, for example, even share, Washington Post about massacre in Bucha, that would be considered a fake, and this person would be facing from 5 years in prison up to 15, depends. Political demonstrations, public events, they've been banned since COVID. So you mentioned this protest-like activity as just street musicians singing songs of foreign agents, because now those artists, they singing songs they are foreign agents. They have criminal cases against them, and I think the protest finds its way. But obviously the backlash that those incredibly talented and brave people received is terrible, because I think now maybe they're going to have a criminal case.
But there's been a sense up to now that despite the war, if you like, the Russian middle class, particularly in Moscow and St. Petersburg, the big cities, they've been doing all right. You know, the shops are still full, the economy appears to be moving, and there's no great movement against Putin. But I wonder about all those people who have lost, either killed or maimed, soldiers in this war. There's an awful lot of people now, and whether there is a spreading sense that this must not go on.
for any kind of protest, Russian regime has an answer. We did see the protests of mothers and wives. They've been teaming up and trying to get answers from the Ministry of Defense because their husbands that are currently serving in Ukraine can't go home. Mm-hmm. But immediately after their first appearance near the Ministry of Defense, which is like physically like a public event that people could see, they got threatened, and they got threatened that their loved ones can be killed or could just disappear, and it's already happening. Just recently, Vyorska, Russian media, did an investigation how Russian soldiers killing each other for money there in Ukraine. And how, for example, very young soldiers texting their moms saying, "Oh, can you send me 1 million rubles? Otherwise, I'm going to be killed." And that is happening, and that's a very massive phenomena.
You're a very prominent anti-Putin Russian voice in the West. Do you feel safe here? We've seen Russian agents go after other people. Do you feel safe in London?
When it comes to physical threat, I don't think I'm being targeted, but you never know. And there have been already cases like Skripal's case or Alexander Litvinenko's case. Well, Russian threat is real. We can see that. We know that because Hristo Groziev was targeted as well in London, and there were these Bulgarian individuals that have been spying on him. I guess that's a concern that Britain should take very seriously. And but personally, I'm not very afraid. I feel quite safe.
We all wish you the very best, and stay safe, as we say. Yeah. Olga Borisova, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, after a difficult couple of weeks for the Home Office, we're going to hear from the politician who wrote that scathing report the current Home Secretary has used as a cause for root and branch overhaul. That's in a few minutes, but first, the time 6:32, and here is Amelia Cox with your news headlines.
A Conservative peer has told LBC it's not sensible to call for ministers to resign over every administrative error. Lord Finkelstein has been speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr after the party leader called for Rachel Reeves to stand down over a property rental issue. A 70-year-old man has died after a helicopter crashed in a field in South Yorkshire this morning. The pilot and 2 other passengers survived with minor injuries. And British nationals who can't get commercial flights out of Jamaica could be flown home on UK chartered services. The island's seen communities flattened by Hurricane Melissa, one of the Atlantic's strongest ever storms. LBC weather, heavy rain tonight spreading eastwards before clearing away by dawn. The odd shower may then linger in the west, a low of 3 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents,
we're going to explore why British military hardware is turning up on the battlefields of Sudan. What does that tell us about the way we are trading arms with certain countries in the Middle East? And are we inadvertently helping to fuel a genocide?
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
Being your own boss has plenty of benefits. Video calls from your home office and spreadsheet admin to the scent of roasting coffee in a cafe. But how secure is the connection you're using? And how can you ensure that your devices, data and digital assets are protected? Just ask BT.
Ears are great, aren't they? One on each side of your head for stereo. It's because of ears that radio ads can amplify your advertising. 40 million adults listen to commercial radio every week. That's 80 million ears, give or take. See radio differently at radiocentre.org.
At TfL, we're helping make roads safer. We're continuing to roll out lower speed limits because 20 miles per hour roads have already seen 24% fewer collisions causing death or serious injury. We're also improving junctions to help keep you safe and improving visibility for our bus drivers with new wing mirror cameras. Search TfL Improvement Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters. Comparison of collisions data before and after implementation of 20 miles per hour speed limit.
You asked, BT answered.
Many businesses rely on cloud apps and storage to keep things running smoothly. And whether you're working from home, on the move, or at a cafe, cloud security ensures your business stays connected and protected.
Cybersecurity is everyone's business. Search BT Business Cybersecurity to find out more.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35. We've had a bit of a theme on the show tonight, I think. The state, the people running the state, and what's going wrong. And the biggest example, one we've talked about before, is the chaos around the Home Office. There's nothing new about this. Back in 2023, a former Home Office advisor, Nick Timothy, did a deep dive review into why the 50,000 civil servants working there weren't doing better, and it's finally been published. Nick Timothy then became Conservative MP for West Suffolk, and he joined me a little earlier to discuss his findings.
I found that the centre of the department wasn't strong enough to enforce its will and to hold the different parts of the department to account. But also there wasn't enough joined-up thinking, especially in the immigration system. So at that time, there wasn't a single civil servant who was in charge of the immigration system as a whole, and various bits of the immigration system were working to often contradictory ends.
And a real problem of demoralisation in the Home Office?
There certainly was an issue with morale. That was one of the reasons why I think some of the highest quality officials in Whitehall were not so keen to move to work on issues like immigration. These are hugely important issues for the country, but lots of officials, I think, felt that it was too risky for their careers.
Too risky, yes. I'm really interested in what you say about the culture, because it may not just be the Foreign Office, it may be more widely across Whitehall. Can I just read to people listening what you've said in this particular part of the report? You said, too much time is wasted on what one official called the fashion of bringing your whole self to work. There are listening circles in which civil servants meet to discuss their feelings about social and political issues, including even the implementation of government policies for which they're responsible, such as the Rwanda scheme. And you go on to say that this is counterproductive and contrary to the spirit of impartiality in the civil service. How bad is this culture?
Well, the civil service is there to implement the policies of the government of the day. That's not us anymore. But, I still respect the fact that the civil service is there to serve their political masters, who are now Labour ministers. But it seemed to me, and I was able to write this in the report because I had lots of officials coming to me to complain about that culture because they didn't like it, that if you allow people to spend hours of the working week sitting around talking about how they feel about social and political issues, including the issues that the department is charged with acting upon. Sometimes that was, things like deporting illegal immigrants from the country. Then that is going to affect how they actually end up implementing those policies.
And so I think, probably having read this, Shabana Mahmood said recently that she didn't want people to bring their whole selves to work. She wanted them to bring their best game to work. Would you applaud that?
That's exactly the kind of culture you need in a government department. Now, as a Conservative MP watching this Labour government, I'm not totally certain that they have what it takes to do the necessary things to stop the channel crossings, to get legal immigration under control. But it is the responsibility of Whitehall officials to do as their political masters instruct.
Let me ask you about a couple of really live issues inside the Conservative Party, big ones. One is the determination to scrap the Climate Change Act and get rid of the net zero targets and so on. The former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said this is electorally very, very damaging. Bashing the green agenda is not something the Conservatives should be doing or get any profit from. What would you say to that?
Well, I think Boris should respect the fact that the Conservative Party is moving on. We don't tend to find it helpful when former leaders try to do some backseat driving, and I think he should respect the fact that Kemi is the leader of the party. What Kemi has said is that over the course of the time since the Climate Change Act and the adoption of net zero, Britain has gone from having broadly internationally competitive energy prices to the most expensive industrial energy prices in the world. And that means decarbonisation, certainly as we've experienced it so far, but certainly when you're asking policy to run faster than the technology will allow, and when the rest of the world isn't doing what you're doing, decarbonisation does mean deindustrialisation. And if we want to get our economy firing on all cylinders again, if we want to reindustrialise, which I personally believe in very, very strongly,
then this is necessary.
Then we have to do these things, because we need to have secure energy, abundant energy, but energy that is internationally competitive.
Well, that's very clear. Let me ask you about the other big issue, which is people with indefinite leave to remain, of whom there are very, very many in this country. Your colleague Katie Lamb suggested that actually they would be removed from this country because we needed to be more culturally coherent. What do you say to that?
Well, first off, the rate of immigration for many years has been far too high. And one of the reasons my party lost the general election quite so resoundingly was our failure to reduce immigration, as we promised in the 2019 manifesto. We were very clear about that. But then the points-based system that was introduced...
We come back to Boris Johnson at this point.
I'm afraid so. The points-based system that was introduced after 2019 meant that we effectively had the most liberal immigration system in the world. That is why everybody now, all the political parties, all the bright young things in the think tanks, are talking about what we do about the number of people who came here on time-limited visas, because a time-limited visa does not give you a guaranteed right to stay in the country forever. And what do we do about this particular concept of indefinite leave to remain? Because it's not the case that everybody who came here during what's now become known as the Boris wave has the right to stay here forever. And there is actually time to undo, to some extent, the mistakes of that period.
But some people got indefinite leave to remain. And I think the draft Conservative bill says that if you're getting benefits or you've got an income below, £38,700 or so, then that indefinite leave to remain will be removed. Now, given that there's an awful lot of people in that situation, it's very important to know whether that is Conservative policy or not.
Well, I think what's really important is that people who come into this country and then if they want to stay here and settle need to be contributors. And large numbers of the people who have come to the country are actually going to be net fiscal recipients over the course of their lifetime. The research, for example, shows that people who enter the country having crossed the Channel cost a net £400,000 per head over the course of their lifetime.
And they should lose their right to remain here. So, in fact, Katie Lamb is right.
No, so in that instance, I'm talking about the Channel crossers. What the party has said, and actually the government has said similar things, is that indefinite leave to remain needs to be reformed so that it is harder to obtain, because I think we think that it shouldn't take 5 years. It should take much longer, and it should be dependent on your contribution while you're here. There is also a question about what happens to people who have already been given indefinite leave to remain. So, for example, if you've committed serious crimes while you've been here, then we might be able to revoke that indefinite leave to remain.
But if you haven't, are you going to remove retrospectively indefinite leave to remain? Or not?
Well, what I just said as an example, that people who have committed serious crimes while they have indefinite leave to remain, obviously that is retrospective.
Nick Timothy, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
And now an LBC scoop, which certainly shocked me. A severely anorexic woman was able to buy the weight loss drug Wegovy from an online pharmacy, something that could have killed her. LBC's Helen Hoddinot picks up the story. Helen.
Andrew, we are protecting the identities of the people in this story, so names and voices have been changed. But LBC was contacted last week by a mum, Debbie, who had found boxes of the weight loss jab Wegovy in her daughter's bedroom. Her daughter, Caitlin, is in her 20s and has been suffering from anorexia for over a decade. Debbie told us the first thing that she does every morning is to go into her daughter's room to check she's still alive.
I've been told by every practitioner that works with her that she is at serious risk of death. You do get moments as a mum when you let those thoughts become really dark. So I have replayed conversations in my head where I call my dad and say, "We lost her." Or I go through my speech for her funeral, and I know that the last line of that would be, I'm so sorry I couldn't save you."
So Debbie regularly checks Caitlin's room for things like laxatives and recently found those boxes of Wegovy. She said her heart dropped. It was supplied by Newman, which is a leading UK online pharmacist. And Caitlin had managed to use an AI-generated image to fake her identity.
Of course, quite easy to do.
Absolutely, and to get around any of the checks that they had in place, which exposes, of course, major shortfallings in its safeguarding. Online pharmacies are supposed to carry out proper two-way consultations before prescribing these high-risk drugs or risk enforcement action. But Lib Dem MP Vera Hobhouse, the chair of the Eating Disorders All-Party Parliamentary Group, has told me that regulations for weight loss drugs that are available online need to be urgently strengthened.
The government for a long time has had a complete blind spot about protecting people with an eating disorder when it comes to their obesity strategy, and not putting safeguards into selling weight loss drugs, over the counter online, is just deeply concerning and very reckless.
The government has told us that medical regulators have their full support to crack down on any rogue prescribers, and Newman has apologised to the patient's family and says they're putting in extra safety protocols.
A real scoop, but more importantly, a very alarming story. Helen, thank you so much for that. Now then, we know that Labour is in trouble, and there's growing dissent at local as well as national level. In Nottingham, a Labour stronghold, 6 councillors have left the party to found a new Nottingham People's Alliance, which will become the opposition group on the council. So why have they done this? Let's talk to Kirsty L. Jones, one of the councillors who has quit the party. Kirsty, thanks for joining LBC tonight. So what was it about Keir Starmer's Labour Party that made you determined to leave it?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. So, we've obviously been talking on the doorsteps to lots of residents and everything like that, and Labour's become a toxic kind of party now. It doesn't represent ordinary people's concerns. The manifesto that was stood on both by us locally and the National Party had nothing followed. Instead of improving people's living standards, they've got winter fuel allowance, they've slashed disability benefits, they are concentrating on local government reorganisation rather than funding local government properly, and people are disappointed in that.
Would it be fair to say, Kirsty, that you are broadly all on the left of the party, that you've broken away? And can I ask, are you in contact with other groups? Is this going to happen around the country? Are you in contact with any other groups? And what's your view of Jeremy Corbyn and Zarah Sultana's party?
So we've been working closely with Broxtowe Alliance. So they run Broxtowe Borough Council at the moment. And it was big news when they obviously defected from the Labour Party too, because of the kind of top-down approach from Starmer's control of the party. Your party is something that we're obviously looking at because they've created a lot of interest, and we probably do align with kind of the principles in which they stand. But as a local Nottingham People's Alliance, we want to represent Nottingham people, and we want Nottingham people to decide whether we would affiliate or any sort of arrangement with your party in the future or not.
So I guess what everybody around the country is wondering is this the start of something that's going to spread around England, spread around the entire UK? What's your message?
I think it is. I think we already see a lot of Labour councillors that feel massively disappointed in the direction that Labour has taken and the kind of defensiveness that they have in terms of any sort of challenge from Labour councillors or Labour members. And, across the country, we can see multiple councils or boroughs where independent groups have taken over.
Kirsty L. Jones of the Nottingham People's Party, if I can put it that way, thank you very much indeed for joining LBC tonight. Now then, it's near the end of the show, and it's Thursday, which can mean only one thing. It's time for our political panel. That's up next, but the time now, 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Join me and Kemi Badenoch, the Leader of the Opposition, at 7 for a whole hour where you have your chance to quiz her on any question you like.
Ian Dale on LBC.
Get that Euro Millions feeling with Friday's £65 million jackpot. Plus, 10 UK winners are guaranteed to be millionaires. That's 10 more reasons to dance. 10 more robots, 10 more limbos, 10 more salsas. Friday's Euro Millions jackpot is £65 million. And 10 UK winners are guaranteed to be millionaires. Euro Millions from the National Lottery. Play on app. Estimated jackpot. Account terms, rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
Switching to Vodafone full fibre broadband is now as easy as pie. Oh, freshly baked. It's a walk in the park. Hello, little fella. It's like taking candy from a baby. Come on, as if I'd do that. With one touch switch, it's easy. We sort everything out for you. We even contact your current provider. Plus, we'll help towards leaving fees. Switch today to full fibre broadband with Vodafone.
Up to £200 credit to cover leaving fees. More information and terms at vodafone.co.uk/broadband.
This Waitrose Wine Lover Week, find your perfect match with 4 for 3 on wine and fizz. Meet our smooth Argentinian Catina Malbec that can handle the rich flavours of roast beef, or the elegant No. 1 Chablis, effortlessly charming with a cheese board. Perhaps your type is more bubbly, like our Cab de Turckheim Cremant d'Alsace, an unforgettable fling for any canapé. Find your perfect wine pairing at Waitrose, the home of food lovers. Selected stores and lines subject to availability. Exclude Scotland boxed wines and bottles priced £6 or under and £100 or over.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:50, and now it's time for our political panel at the end of a very politically eventful day, which came off the end of a very eventful political week here at Westminster. Harriet Symonds of PoliticsHome and Emma Burnell of LabourList are both here to discuss it with me. Let me start with you, Emma, because we've just heard from Nottingham, where the 6 councillors have broken away from the Labour Party, and apparently it's the same thing in Broxbourne. Are you beginning to pick up this trend in other places as well?
Yeah, we've had a few reports in our newsletter, which comes out every weekday. And there's been a few times where we've picked up local stories where councillors have been leaving the party for a variety of reasons, but usually sort of frustration at the leadership and feeling that they're not as aligned with their politics
as they should be. And there's clearly, a gap on the left, and there's clearly a serious threat from Zach Bolansky and the Green Party. What's your what are your members and contributors saying about that at the moment?
I think there are a number of different takes on it, and that's what LabourList is for in many ways. We publish takes from across the party. I think that we are in a completely unfamiliar political world where the Green Party used to sort of siphon off votes very specifically on environmental issues.
Yeah, and not many.
And not very many. I mean, enough in certain areas that it was a problem, but not across the country. Where I think there's a real challenge, particularly as politics is fragmenting, is that you can take a lot of votes across the country, but you don't know in the same way that you just used to where and how that's going to shake out. So the kind of targeting work that parties think about so much for so long in advance of any election just gets so much harder to do.
It's much harder. Harriet, let me ask you about the big story of today, obviously, which is Rachel Reeves, who seemed to be hanging by a thread at sort of around lunchtime, early afternoon, and then is, I would say, completely safe now.
Yes, it's been a busy sort of last hour or so with new sort of emails coming to light between the letting agency and the Chancellor's husband, which sort of seems to get her off the hook here. Sort of they had agreed at the time that they would be applying for the licence on the Chancellor and her husband's behalf and have now apologised to the Chancellor for that oversight.
The fact that they apologised seemed to me to be the end of the story, pretty much.
Yes, although I would say, it's not great timing for Labour, sort of given that she's meant to be going to sort of ask the voters to trust her with the budget next month and sort of, potentially this raises questions about her sort of judgment.
There's so much to talk about this week. Obviously, we'll talk a bit about the budget. But I guess the other thing that's been really, really striking is the Home Office. I was talking to Nick Timothy earlier on, but we've had the Kabatu case, and a general air of kind of clod-hopping incompetence is I think, the fairest and kindest way I can put it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, because I'm old enough to, John Reed saying that the Home Office wasn't fit for purpose.
Me too.
20 or so years ago, and it doesn't seem to have changed. Whether the reasons it's not fit for purpose have changed or not, that's another conversation. But it's clearly a broken organisation. Whether Shabana Mahmood can fix the organisation or whether it just needs absolutely to be dismantled and rebuilt into something else, that is a bigger question.
Absolutely. So, Harriet, let's talk a little bit about Shabana Mahmood at the moment, because she's been very outspoken about it. She is clearly a toughie. She's clearly a much more adept media performer than many of the cabinet, and she's been kind of adopted by quite a lot of the right-wing press as kind of almost one of theirs. What do you make of the challenge ahead of her?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have viewed her as a very impressive person when she was at Justice. And I think a few people privately hoped that she would be moved over to the Home Office, but people didn't necessarily think that would happen. And obviously, when it did, I think a lot of people were really sort of hopeful about what that would mean for, stopping the boats.
Yeah. But she absolutely has to deliver. That's the problem. And she's working with a dysfunctional organisation, and institutional change is the hardest thing of all.
100%. And it seems like we can't go a week or 2 weeks without there being some sort of scandal or issue sort of coming out of the Home Office. Obviously, we saw the migrant sex offender Kabatu on Friday sort of inadvertently, mistakenly released from prison when he should have been deported. I mean,
and apparently tried to get back again.
5 days.
And they wouldn't let him in.
I mean, if that doesn't sum up the state of things.
We shouldn't laugh, but it is an extraordinary Keystone Cops moment. Emma, let me come back to you on the wider question, because all this feeds into the opinion polls, of course, and we're now seeing Labour down at very, very low numbers in the opinion polls. YouGov, a big company showing Labour down at 17 points, others even lower than that. We appear to be in a 5-party system now, which means that almost all political predictions become impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I think, frankly, making predictions in politics has always been a mug's game. There are a few elections where you can go, I think I know which way this is going to go. But I remember 2017, Theresa May calling that election thinking she was going to increase her majority.
Yeah.
So this has been drifting this way for a really long time. But it's like all these things. How did it end? Really slowly and then really suddenly.
Yes, that's very well. But like bankruptcy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you about changing the voting system, because I was really struck this week. I was talking to Ed Davey on the show, and he said the Liberal Democrats had won a council by-election in Cornwall, I think it was, with 17% of the vote, 1-7, because of the way the thing. So this is a system that we now have, which is just completely unfit for purpose, ?
Well, Reform, for a long time, were calling for sort of a change to the voting system, but now find themselves...
Now they're in the lead.
Yeah. And that's always what happens, isn't it?
Yes. The person who is leading sort of then goes very quiet on the issue. But, we are in a completely uncharted waters here with the sort of increasing number of parties entering British politics. And the Greens, I think, is a really interesting party at the moment. They're
rocketing up.
They are doing so well in the polls under their new leader, Zach Plansky, and he's clearly offering something that your party perhaps could have offered, but
if they'd been a bit more organised, if they got their act together. Final thing to talk about briefly, of course, is the budget ahead of us. I'd like both of your views on what seems to me to be one of the really difficult choices that the Chancellor has to make. Raise income tax for everybody, breaking your election commitment, but in a kind of fair and general way, or go for individual taxes. Which way would you go, Emma?
God, it's so hard. I think breaking a manifesto pledge in an era where political trust is at such an all-time low is going to be so hard to do.
Lethal. OK. Harriet, very quickly.
I mean, I think I'd be tempted to agree. I think breaking a manifesto pledge is very dangerous.
OK. Rachel Reeves, we've been very nice to you all this show, so I hope you were listening to that as well. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion, put your news categories in the order you'd like them, pause, rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. So download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Henry Riley. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale, joined by the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Thanks, Andrew.
She hasn't got a grip on the economy. They've got no...